ahead and call to order the Community Development Committee meeting. Tonight we've got one public presentation for action items and two discussion items. First up will be a split lot, and Brian Scott will be our presenter.
Emily, bring this up.
But we are going to split hairs over it, right?
No doubt.
That'll work, thank you.
I could.
This property is located at 5539 Reeds. There's currently a house right there on the lot. They are interested in splitting their lot in half, selling the north half to a home builder who will build a new home on it. They already have a home builder lined up ready to go and buy that property. This is exactly like the lot split that you had about a year ago, directly behind it to the east, and across the street about 6 months ago on Biennial.
Brian, is 60 foot or we can't go any lower?
Right.
Lower than 60, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, really the minimum is 70 feet wide, but there is that exception within the zoning that if all the properties in that block, which would be this block defined by Maple, 56th Street, Reed, 55th Street, all those properties, all those lots are generally the same width, about 60 feet, 62 feet, then that would be acceptable. So this was presented to the Planning Commission at their meeting last Monday evening, and the owners were there, as well as the builder. There was no comments from the public on it, and it was approved unanimously by the Planning Commission that evening to recommend to you all. So it'll be on your agenda Wednesday the 15th.
And what's our threshold on height?
Typically 2 stories.
Okay, so this would not be going over that, right?
No, no. And the homes that are being proposed are 2-story. This southern lot here on Maple has been sold, and he came in beginning of April and submitted his plan as a 2-story.
Okay.
And the same with the one, he's building one right now. He's already started his foundation work on it. You drive by, you see that. That'll be a 2-story.
Okay.
And then probably the one next to it will be 2-story as well.
So for density purposes, it's really better to have the 2-story, isn't it?
For market purposes, you know.
Okay.
All these homes will sell about $225, $250, right around that price range, maybe even a little bit more. He actually has a buyer potentially for this lot already. It's a woman that contacted me about a month or 2 ago. She lives in countryside, in a very large home with just her son. And she's wanting to downsize, but she wants to stay in the community. And she wants to buy new. Really limits her options. So today's your lucky day. I got somebody who's going to do
The lot right behind that, I noticed that they've started taking down the trees and everything.
Yeah. In fact, his plans were approved. They were brought back Friday from IBTS.
Oh, okay.
So he's ready to go. So
I'm curious, when we're doing rebuilds like that, does the tree board weigh in on the loss of trees?
generally no. You know, typically discuss that with them. Any new homeowner over time, I'm sure, will plant new trees on their property to provide some shade.
It looks like they're trying to retain one of them, which is good. Any other questions for Ryan?
These have been the same builder so far, or some of them?
Wait.
I hope the names
Well,
sound familiar.
This gentleman on Maple, here at the corner, that's a different builder.
Okay.
But the others are all the same builder, Steve Clayton. And he builds custom homes. He's built several in Mission, in Johnson County over the years.
There's one over by Martha's house, across the street from Martha, that you did a few years back. This is a public presentation.
Presentation.
It'll come up under your action items,
Okay.
planning commission.
The first action item we have tonight is the acceptance of the April 3rd, 2019 CDC minutes.
Accepted.
Second?
Thank you, Martha. These second item that we have is the 2019-2020 rock salt. Brent Morton.
Thank you. Let's get the salt. I'm gonna buy a little salt this year. Yeah. Most we've used since I've been here, for sure, this season. So we took it out for bid this year. Salt prices have gone up per ton over the last couple of years. So we saw an increase this year. We had 3 bidders. We approached Independent Salt Corporation, which we've been using for the last 2 years, Hutchison Salt and Central Salt. Those 2 did not bid on it. I spoke with Overland Park too, which we'll talk about in a second, but they also reached out to those 2, and bids they had were almost double the price. So, I mean, they just know they can't compete right now, or they've got other contracts where they're moving salt to in different areas of the country. So we only had one company come back with a bid, and we saw a little bit of an increase there. The dome holds about 1,800 tons. We went through basically about 800 tons this year, and spoke with some other cities. We fared pretty well compared to some of the other cities, the amount of salt they use. So, I mean, we're right there on the line of what they used or less. So we had a pretty good season with what we had to use. In the 2021 and 22 season, I spoke with Overland Park. I wasn't able to get on their contract yet because they already signed it, but in 2021 we should be able to piggyback off of them and see a pretty good reduction in salt prices, and just continue with that, on their bulk salt pricing for the remainder of the time. So they renew that every 3 years, so it's up in 2021, and I spoke with them, so we'll be able to get on that contract when they renew it. So we'll see some savings there. So we're looking for approval at $59.54 per ton. We've got an available budget of about $55,000. Probably spent a couple, maybe 1,000 of that so far on ice melt this season, just with sidewalks and trails and stuff like that. So we'll be able to get the dome back up to capacity and get through the season. And I mean, the last 2 years we've had to fill up the dome with the ice and snow we've used, but the previous couple of years we didn't have to buy any, and that rolls back in the general fund. So we're actually doing good on funds for not having to buy it every year. It's just the last 2 years we've seen an increase in use. So if anybody's got any questions or comments or...
No, I just appreciated Brent approaching Overland Park, and I think their bid for this year was with the same company that you're recommending, but they were almost $9
And we were...
a ton cheaper, so that we will realize
some savings.
Some
Very,
savings.
very true.
And we were at about $52, and we were with Independent Salt last time. Just, you know, we got an increase, and I spoke with Independent Salt and tried to get them to let us in on that contract, and they just wouldn't do it. So we just got to get on with Overland Park next time they bid it, and we'll see that savings then. So hopefully, just go ahead.
Okay, just what's the most that we've ever used? If it'll hold 1,800.
This is the farthest I've ever been in the dome in the 9 years I've been here. So I would say we used around 800, but it could be close to 1,000. It's hard to measure it just by, yeah, so. But it's the most I've ever seen used. We bought 800 tons last year, and we put 200 tons in the small dome because it wouldn't all fit. But I think every bit we buy this year we'll be able to get in that big dome. So.
Now, Brent, are you going to take what's there out and put the new stuff in and put that on top so it's first in, first out?
I asked that same question. What do you do? How do you make? No, but
It doesn't go bad, and you don't want to move it. The more times you move it, the more you break it up, and you'll turn it into all
Right, I
those
was just
powders.
kidding.
Oh, okay.
I bet they do sort of move. I mean, you.
We had those 6 years where we didn't use much at all, and we had to dig it out because it turned into basically concrete.
Yeah.
But I had to break it up, and the guys, when they get in there, they spent 30 minutes trying to break up a load to fill a truck. So if it sits in there for 6 years or 5 years, we'll have to go in there and break some of it up and put it back in. But
I hope it sits there.
I do too. I do too. I mean, you guys can see the curb problems we're having with all the salt we had to use this year and road problems.
Yeah.
So the less we use, the better off we are for sure.
Any other questions? All right, consent?
Oh, sure.
All right. All right, so if you want to hang on and talk about the bridge inspections?
I don't think so.
I don't know.
So this is the biennial bridge inspection. We do this every 2 years. It's a KDOT requirement. It requires us to inspect all 9 bridges in town that are 20 foot and greater. It rates our bridges on a basically 0 to 9 scale, 9 being the best. GBA, or George Butler, has been doing it for the last 3 cycles, and the price really hasn't changed at all, so we've been sticking with them. They are KDOT certified, and they plug everything into the KDOT portal. If KDOT has any problems, they will come look at our books every 2 years. They'll deal with them and make sure everything's the way KDOT wants it in their system. There was a few changes KDOT made this year with the inventory stuff, but GBA is on board with that, and they've got it all figured out, so it should be a seamless process. They provide us with a bridge inspection book and GIS stuff, but we get one of these every 2 years. Okay.
And what I handed out is the inventory for 2017, so those are the ratings on the bridges the last time the GBA conducted their inspections.
So they'll give us some guidelines on stuff we can do to maintain the bridges every 2 years. Once the bridge hits a 6, they start giving us some time to start coming up with some plans to maintain that bridge and extend the life of it. The worst one we got right now is on Reed's, and we are actually having some problems with that right now, but we've got Woodson working on some documents for some bridge repairs. Some of the inlet grates have failed, and if you notice when you drive over bridges, they all usually dump into a creek channel. The inlet's right there, so the salt is just super hard on those inlets and gets into those bridge decks and concrete, so that's usually where you have failures and have to do some repairs. And there's, storm debris on some of them open channels that, get caught up in there, so you got about a 75-year lifespan when they're from brand new if you maintain them. So we're doing pretty good on our bridges. It's come to the time where we're going to have to repair a few over the next 10 years, but overall not a giant expense, and we're keeping up with them. Also, this year we got the gateway boxes cleaned out. I'm sure you guys all know we pushed that through. They're also going to inspect those for us this time just to make sure that we don't have any problems in those boxes since we pulled all that debris out. And they're going to get with the gateway site developer too, so everybody can walk the boxes together to make sure everybody's on the same page, and if there's anything, issues that anybody's got, we can get that figured out and taken care of. So it's an approval of $9,300, and that provides all documentation, inspection services, and the bridge inspection book that they provide us. And the available budget for that is $20,000. Yeah.
I just have one question. Do we have a certain rating at which point they get incorporated into our CIP?
Probably when it hits about a 6 or a 5,
Okay.
we'll start talking about the 10-year repairs or replacement process.
When they look at the whole, do they look at miles traveled over that bridge? Are there certain factors that they look at to assess?
So they're not technically doing that. They've got density testers, and they'll hit them with steel bars. I know it sounds pretty old school, but it gives them that sound of that hollow sound, and that can tell you that concrete's deteriorating around that rebar, and it'll give you an idea on how far back that goes. So it kind of gives you some options if it's repairable or if it's on its way to failure. So they can core sample sometimes if it's been overlaid a few times and see how deep the bridge deck is. But there's no real traffic counts or anything like that on bridge decks that they really look at, I don't think.
Do you know the bridge in Minneapolis that failed, what rating it was?
I do not. I'd be interested to know.
Ken has a question.
Yes.
Brent, I had asked a question of Laura on the non-KDOT. The KDOT is what, 20 feet
Yes.
and greater?
Yes.
On the ones that are smaller than that exist around the city, what are the ways in which those are inspected?
So we're working on that right now with VHC Roads and with SMAC funding on doing our stormwater inventory and assessment on condition rating. And all that will get tied in with that because they're usually culverts or concrete pipe or CMP.
Right.
So all those ratings will get tied into that system with the 1 to 5 rating. And then they'll estimate a risk factor for, dead end streets, and the county's working on that. If that fails, it gets a higher, rating, and, there's more ability to pull funds on getting that fixed on their new program they're rolling out the door next year.
So they are stormwater structures, not bridges.
Yes. Thank you, Laura.
Pat, I think Pat had a question.
Yes?
Oh, I did? Yeah, I asked her, what happened to the first 11 bridges? We had bridge 12 through 20.
Oh, we retired.
Okay.
By your-
Cost savings right there.
Okay, do we take it to council concern?
Good job.
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, the next item we have is the purchase of a carpet extractor and Clorox sprayer for the community center.
And it's me, not John Vaughn, I'm sorry I didn't get the name changed, but, so the community center had budgeted in their CIP for 2019 replacement of their carpet cleaner. They use a carpet cleaner, staff uses a carpet cleaner in between most rentals over at the facility to keep the carpets clean and looking nice for the patrons who are using our facility. The current equipment, it took us a little bit longer. Actually, I think this was budgeted in 2018, pardon me. And with the transition and bringing our new facility and maintenance supervisor, Aaron Cherry, on board, and just needing to get a little bit familiar with the existing equipment and the facility needs, we weren't prepared to move forward with that purchase in 2018. So they continue to research that and have found a piece of equipment that gives them a programmable setting to reduce the amount of solution that's applied. That does not exist on the current carpet equipment that we have now. So right now the carpets are 1 degree of wet and it takes longer for those to dry out, and so it increases that time between usage. So as they looked at that and took that out to bid, they did solicit bids for that purchase and had 4 responses. The lowest of which was Bill's floor machine service. That was determined to be the lowest and most responsive bid at $11,200. With the savings identified, they had $16,000 budgeted. They also approached me and asked about whether or not I would support them bringing forward a recommendation to add a Clorox Total 360 sprayer to that purchase because of all of, we spent a lot of time and resources, both chemicals and human, keeping the equipment wiped down. If you think about just the weight room, cardio equipment, indoor playground equipment, summer camp, all of that, this machine will allow them to go in and basically spray, and it's portable, so we can use it really at any of our facilities. And I said, certainly, I think that seems like a great addition, keeps them within budget. So they were recommending the addition of that for $4,248.96, still bringing the total combined purchase in under the budget by about $550.
Yes, questions?
I would also ask if they do the spraying in the daycare area, that we understand what the toxicity volume is of
Sure.
vapors.
Well, I would say in any area, but specifically the daycare.
Yeah, because the kids on the floors and with the faces and all that, we don't want that.
Any other questions? Great job, I think that Clorox thing is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Consent?
That total 360 sprayer.
All right, we have 2 discussion items this evening. The first one is financing and design of the Rock Creek improvements. Marcy?
Yes, so I've got just a brief presentation, and it's a little light, I realize. I don't know whether, is that better, worse? That's too much. How about that? So I printed a copy of the presentation. Martha has it electronically, so we'll update the packet later this evening with this information. But as you know, we just kind of wanted to walk through design and financing alternatives for repair of the Rock Creek Channel, that portion that extends just east of Knoll through the culverts and wing walls at Roland Drive. So this is a project that has been contemplated in the city's 5-year CIP program. It connects upstream and downstream improvements that have already been made and has, in our planning processes, historically been identified as an open channel, or maintenance of that channel as an open channel through that process. In 2017, we submitted a preliminary engineering study to Johnson County SMAC for potential funding. The project was approved and added to the list And in 2017, it went on the list as a priority number 11 out of 23 projects on the list. Eligible for about $2.9 million in Johnson County stormwater funding. At that time, there were $44 million in total projects on the list, with approximately $10 million available annually to fund these types of projects. So we knew we were a ways out in terms of being able to access those SMAC dollars, but we were glad to be on the list. I think we had a conversation late last year that in exploring options with SMAC, I had been told that we might have the potential to actually move that funding up and be eligible for that funding in 2020. When projects were actually submitted in January of 2019, our project moved from 11th on the list to 21st on the list. Their projects are scored and prioritized by a cost-benefit rating system, and there were an extension project and several other projects, preliminary engineering studies, who scored significantly higher in terms of the cost-benefit rating and leapfrogged us on that project list. So we moved way down on the list, and the total project cost increased from $44 million to $98 million. Again, and we are moving in 2020. SMAC is changing their funding and their business model, and they will be taking a watershed approach to funding projects of this type. So you don't do a preliminary engineering study just within your own city. You have to take on a watershed-based preliminary engineering study, which is the right way to approach the management of stormwater, but it turns on its ear this list of now 21 or 23 projects because they don't know how they're going to then move forward, because none of the projects on that list have a watershed-based study or preliminary engineering study that has been submitted. So, being disappointed in the potential for those SMAC funds to not be available really in the foreseeable future, because one of the things, and you've heard us talk about, they're adding maintenance projects, which is a great addition to the stormwater program and the stormwater management program, but that's taking away dollars that are available for the larger projects as well. So that pool of available dollars is shrinking in a variety of ways. So, in addition, so we've been looking at, the project was identified in our CIP. We've tried to pursue and leverage outside funding. Then in August of 2017, as we're all aware, there was a subsidence that occurred at the Rolling Fork Homes Association that impacted 21 townhomes. We have spent a tremendous amount of time exploring kind of cooperative solutions to resolve that, and as you are familiar, we created a community improvement district at the April 17th City Council meeting that will allow for the Rolling Fork Homes Association property owners to finance improvements to their private property over a 22-year period, thereby kind of spreading out those costs a little bit more evenly for them. So based on that and their participation, we sort of have a commitment to at least move forward in 2019 with improvements that will impact and restore their private parking areas through the result of the CIP. So that brings us to kind of a key decision point in terms of how do we move this forward, knowing that SMAC funding is probably not available in our lifetime on this project. We have the Rolling Fork Homes Association, who has worked very diligently with us to find a solution. So what are those solutions? And so I want to step through just a couple of options and decision points as we look at both the scale of the design and construction, and then the opportunities and options for financing. So option 1A, what I've titled 1A this evening, is really what I would classify as what I think needs to be the immediate repairs. So that includes the repairs to the Rolling Fork Homes Association, a limited retaining wall, and if you'll flip to the map. So this is the map from the preliminary engineering study of what the entire project would look like. So the yellow lines are modular block walls. This is a cast-in-place concrete wall. So essentially you can see that effectively the entire channel becomes reinforced. Option 1A would address the area behind the Rolling Court properties and about another 260 linear feet of wall that would be required in the city's creek in order to support that, and then about 200 linear feet of wall that would protect and deal with the erosion issues that are occurring at the MD Management parking lot. So if you'll flip back to the other side. So the estimated engineering costs to accomplish that option are estimated at $242,292. That includes design, all of the geotech work, and the construction inspection. So that's basically start to finish those consultant services on that project. And then the estimated construction costs for that immediate repair, those immediate repairs option 1A are estimated at $1.1 million for a project total of about $1,375,000. Then if we look at 1B, so if we do that and we proceed with option 1A and do those limited repairs now, at some point we need to come back and finish the balance of the construction work in that channel. So option 1B is the balance of that project, which is all city work, and would extend those walls and really deal with the channel to the extent that you saw on the preliminary engineering study map. So the estimated engineering costs, again, design, geotech, construction, inspection for that are $550,000. Estimated construction costs of $4.2 million, so a project total of about $4.8 million to come back in and complete the balance of the channel. The other option is to look at tackling this all at one time. And that's what I've outlined in the presentation this evening as option 2. Would include the entire City SMAC project, which incorporates the restoration of the MD Management property and the improvements to the Rolling Court Homes Association. And this is the expanded version. You will remember we looked at 2 different CID petitions for them because they expanded the improvements to their parking area as we went through this last round of creating and establishing the CID. So when we look at option 2, we have estimated engineering costs and consultant costs of $694,500, and estimated construction costs of $4.5 million for a project total of just a little more than $5.2 million.
May I ask a quick question?
Uh-huh.
Do we have an idea economically, the value of all that property collectively looked at? I mean, you wouldn't want to throw $2 million onto something that was only worth $500,000. What's the total value of that property?
I don't know, but we can pull and take a look at what the value is that is impacted by everything that's touched by that project. So again, I think the next slide, and I threw this map in here several times. So the next slide again would be, this would be the limits of option 2. So this includes the reinforcement of this channel. This pink or purple parcel here is a property that needs to be acquired. We would actually probably consider acquiring the property next door. This is the homeowner that we've been out to visit with in the past and who has approached us. I didn't have GBA redo this, so either one of these properties will work, but we need these properties in order to be able to get the equipment in to build this cast-in-place wall, just because of the size and height of that. One of the challenges that we were discussing when we were thinking there might be SMAC funding involved was once we get in and we use that property to access and complete the construction, we essentially have a lot that could be resold and redeveloped with a home on it. We would be limited if we were doing this with SMAC funds with our ability, or we would potentially have to, repay or reimburse SMAC through that process. If we're doing it 100% at our expense, obviously that is an option that we would have going forward. We can make some decisions about what we wanted to do with that piece of ground. So if you'll go to the next slide. So then, what I kind of wanted to do was show you the potential cost increase or estimated cost increase from doing the project in phases instead of 2 phases instead of 1. So if you look at option 1A and 1B combined, you're about almost $6.2 million versus your $5.2 million. So you're $940,000, just shy of $1 million that we would be looking at in increased cost if we split this project into 2 phases versus 1.
That doesn't consider increased cost that potentially could
Go up.
go up.
That's correct, and so these are 2019 dollars, and I thank you for that distinction. When we look at the actual CIP budget worksheets, I have in phase 2 of that included some inflation. So yes, this is on the low end. That $1 million is 2019 dollars, so you could expect probably some inflation with that. So those are kind of the two decisions that we have to make from a design perspective. We've talked.
But this is only discussion this evening. You're not looking for a decision.
Correct. We're not looking for a decision this evening. Additional questions and maybe some guidance, and we'll kind of talk about next steps when we get to that. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So that's the design piece. So we have talked extensively with GBA. Do we have the opportunity to let the larger design contract, and then basically you just design up to the MD management lot? And there's enough difference in the survey work and the geotechnical work and the design work that they have, I think, put its ear, and they don't feel like there's an opportunity to really do that. So we either need to let the smaller contract or the larger design contract. So those are sort of the considerations on the design side. Then obviously following closely on the heels of that are the financing considerations. So one of the things that I wanted to just outline, and I won't spend a lot of time, but I just pulled some information directly out of the city's existing debt policies, which are published in our budget book annually. But it talks about those situations in which we will consider debt financing. And so we're very clear in our debt policy that we will not consider debt for any recurring purpose, such as current operating or maintenance expenses. So the only time we want to look at debt is for one-time capital improvement projects or unusual equipment purchases. So in this instance, we're obviously looking at a one-time capital improvement project, and only under the following circumstances. So when a project has been included in our 5-year CIP, which this one has, when the project is the result of growth-related activities, that does not apply in this case, when the project's useful life or will be equal to or exceed the term of the financing. And we also, in our policy, outline that our practice would be, and our preference is to issue debt that does not extend beyond a 10-year horizon. So certainly this is an improvement that would outlast that financing term. And then when there are designated revenues sufficient to service the debt. So the number one rule, and place where we generally start, is we're not going to recommend issuing debt if we don't know how we're going to pay for it. So next slide, please. So then also really just taken out of our debt policy, but I wanted to highlight because we don't talk about these things very often, and quite honestly, we haven't issued debt since 2014, actually 2013, when we issued debt for the improvements to the MFAC. So also in our debt policy, we outline considerations or factors that need to be evaluated when we're looking at pay-as-you-go versus debt financing. So the factors which favor pay-as-you-go, obviously the project could adequately be funded from available current balances. It can be completed in an acceptable time frame given the acceptable revenues. If taking on additional debt would adversely affect the city's credit rating or repayment sources, or if the market conditions would be unstable or suggest difficulties in marketing the debt. The factors to consider which favor a long-term debt financing include circumstances where revenues are available and are considered to be sufficient and reliable so that the financing can be marketed with appropriate credit rating. Again, market conditions for favorable interest rates and a demand for municipal debt financing. The project is immediately required to meet or relieve capacity needs or existing life, health, safety needs. I think in this instance, we're talking about severe erosion, situations, and certainly value of the property for the Rolling Port Homes Association. Unprogrammed cash reserves are not sufficient to pay project costs, and the life of the project or asset financed is 5 years or longer. So certainly as we go through those factors and those criteria, it would suggest that this might be a project that we would want to consider debt financing for. Next slide, thank you. So Cities in Kansas are subject to statutory debt limit considerations. Those are outlined in KS 10-308. And generally, they provide that the debt of the city is limited to 30% of our assessed valuation, including motor vehicles. They do then go on to exempt debt that is used for certain purposes, and stormwater debt is a type of debt that has historically been exempted from calculations of that legal debt limit. I will tell you that in my tenure here in Mission, we have looked at, most of our debt has been stormwater, so when we apply the legal debt margins to that, in theory, we would be able to exempt that, but we've always been very careful in trying to balance that against what the true and pure statutory debt limitation might be. Included in your audit, I don't remember the specific page, but based on our 2018 valuations, the city's legal debt limit was $51.3 million. So we certainly have capacity when you look at where we are. So now we'll kind of move into, so those are the restrictions that are placed on us from a statutory standpoint. And then we will look at where we stand today or currently with our debt. And that was intended just to be a picture. So it's way too small. So I gave you a bigger version in your handouts. You have the colorful version of your debt summary for 2019. So these are the current debt that is outstanding for the city of Mission.
Thank God.
Yeah, I was gonna.
The last page of the.
We'll do this, because the rest of these, we're gonna work probably from handouts. And I can see better with the lights on too.
Here it is. It's the last page. It's small.
It has lots of colors on it. So this is also something that we provide each year through the budget process, and it is available in our budget book each year. And what we try to do is identify each debt issue that's outstanding. The color coding really is just kind of to help us look and see the type of debt or the repayment source of the debt. So it's an easy way to look and say anything that's in blue is stormwater debt and is being paid with stormwater revenues in some fashion. So you will see on this summary the issue date, the original issue amount. So original issue amount of the debt currently outstanding was about $38.7 million. At the beginning of 2019, $23.1 million of that was still outstanding. We will make total debt service, principal and interest payments of just over $4 million in 2019, leaving us with an outstanding amount at 12/31/19 of $19.7 or $19.8 million. So again, we have been progressively reducing our debt and been very deliberate in situations and taking on new debt. So you can kind of see then the repayment source for each one of those. The existing stormwater debt has been covered by stormwater utility fees. And for many years, as you know, the stormwater utility rate was set essentially at the point at which it covered debt service, and it didn't leave us a lot of money or really any funds available to do other projects that might come up. So this is a snapshot of our current debt. So you can see where we would be at the end of this year at $19.8 million is well below the $51.3 million statutory debt limit, but also, sorry, my allergies are kicking in.
And we have one project that's, the debt's going to be retired next year, right?
Yes. So when we look at this then in a different way, all of our debt, with the exception of the stormwater debt that we have, will be retired by 2023. So all of the existing streets, so the existing street debt retires in 2022 with expiration of the quarter-cent sales tax. And the debt on the MFAG expires in 2023 with expiration of the Parks and Recreation sales tax. So, but for the stormwater debt, which has been restructured and refinanced over time to create a very level debt service repayment stream, the stormwater debt extends out, well, technically it extends out through 2031, but if you look at the larger handouts as we move into that, you'll see that in the last 2027 through 2031 is a $6,000 a year repayment for an RA loan for the green infrastructure stormwater projects that were put in several years ago. So effectively, no debt service really on stormwater even from 2027. So go ahead and go to the next slide if you would, please. So again, current debt picture, outstanding at 12/31/19, about 19.8 million. All existing debt with the exception of stormwater will be retired by 2023. What other potential debt considerations might we have looming out there? So we've talked in the past for the last several budget cycles as we've gone through our 5-year CIP that Fox Ridge Phase 2 at about $4.5 million is probably a project that is larger than we could cash flow. Yeah, even though that project does have some significant CARS reimbursements, that cash flow situation there would be something that we would look at. And then certainly at $10.8 million, the next phase of Johnson Drive from Lamar to Metcalf would be something that we would look to entertain. Again, though, but generally in that time horizon, the rest of your existing street debt is going to fall off. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, however, though, is that repayment source for the existing street debt will also expire in 2022. And so as we look at financing considerations for those street projects, we will certainly need to keep in mind what our options are for that. How do we pay for it question. The other thing that we've talked about in the past is once we get a little bit further into this asset management piece on the streets, would it make some sense to put together a larger package to get some full depth reconstruction done? And if we were to do that, is that something that we would consider debt financing? So again, on the street side, it's really the only place where we talked about potential for existing debt. But I think there are a lot of other things that we need to consider and evaluate.
Quick question.
Yes.
Comment. As we're moving down the line with street reconstruction, I hope we will also start looking at new materials that are being invented and new ideas for longevity of roads, whether it be through concrete or pavement, that we look toward things that will last longer based on number of cars going. I mean, Fox Ridge, you're not going to have near the traffic that you do on Johnson Drive, but it seems that we go through the same pattern of having to replace, everybody does, until the technology changes to allow streets to have either better components that make up the cement or whatever is used on the street. I think we should be looking at that and go out and look at, sample projects that have maybe been done across the country that have used different types of elements in the makeup of the.
No, I think the evaluation of technology is absolutely critical. I think the other piece where I think we have not done ourselves any favors over the years is by not having established street construction standards. And that in other cities is something that, extends the life of those streets because they were built to those appropriate standards at the time they were put in. So that is certainly something that as we move forward, particularly with the full depth reconstructions, we have to evaluate and get those street standards put in place, which should extend the life. You go on to the next slide after that. You're fine there.
With regards to the project, doing the entire section, the bowling alley property, what impact does that have in terms of the status of that property with regards to this project?
It doesn't. It doesn't have an impact on that at all. And I am hoping tomorrow, I had a meeting this morning with Pete Evan, I'm hoping tomorrow I'll be able to give you an update on the status of that building and how we want to move forward to address, because I know we all have concerns about the condition of that building. So if you will then, let's look at, so the next step that I wanted to do, we've talked about design, we've talked about what our current debt situation is, so then let's really look at the nitty gritty and the numbers of how we might pay for this.
If I could, Laura, because I don't want us to get lost in the detail.
Yes.
Because I think we need to back out for a second. There's three basic questions that we're going to have to come to grips with. One, is it time to make the creek repairs? Yes or no? Is it time? We've looked at this for a long time, and we know we're going to have to make repairs. So that's the first question. Yes or no, is it time to make the repairs? The second question then is it a portion, as Laura described, or is it the entire project? And you saw that there's a cost difference. And there's a substantial price tag, there's a cost difference in splitting it up and doing it all. And if you say, I want to do part, that brings in a different financing. And if you say, I want to do it all, that brings in then, do you want to debt finance the bigger number, or do you want to pay cash for it? If you pay cash for it, you're going to have to raise the mill levy. So,
Or your stormwater utility.
or your stormwater utility fees. So, do we need to do the repairs? Is it a portion or all of it? And then how are we going to, if it's all of it, then how are we going to pay for it?
So those are some of the details that I think we're really interested in.
Right.
Raising that stormwater, it's at 217% now, if it goes up any higher.
I understand, but those, so as she goes into the details, just, because when I was listening to the details, they kind of overwhelm you. But you got to surface out of the details and think about what is the basic premise that, because you're going to have to make those decisions to get down to that, which is the best option.
So let's look first at your big 11 by 17 sheet that says Stormwater Program Plan, Option 1, Fago, Rock Creek. Fago. So this assumes we are doing Option 1A and 1B without issuing any debt. So you can see in, oh my goodness, my spreadsheet is not right. So, no, we'll talk around it, I'm sorry, I didn't take I'm showing debt service in this one, which takes the numbers off, which means you could advance this project a little bit sooner, not much sooner. Anyway, this looks at doing that $1.3 million, $1,375,000 project in 19 and lapping over into 20. It also assumes, one of the things in 2019 that I wanted to show you was just the potential for some other drainage projects, maintenance projects that we've been talking about. So the first is the Gateway Box clean out, which has already occurred. Out of that, so we had originally put $250,000 in a repair and maintenance fund in 2019. The 50th Street drainage project that we've talked about and that we authorized the task order to move forward, the estimate to get those drainage repairs done in that neighborhood has come back to the tune of about $167,000. And then we've had 2 sinkholes that have opened up in the last 30 days, and we've estimated probably to get both of those repaired, we're looking somewhere in the $100,000 range. So the miscellaneous sinkhole repairs is something that we need to do. The 50th Street drainage, we would have some discretion, but I did want to put it in the project, or put it in this spreadsheet just so you could kind of see what else was out there. We did.
The sinkholes are located where?
So one sinkhole is just up here on Woodson, next to the at-home apartment management office. And then the other one opened up on Fox Ridge. I don't know the name of the business.
Oh, it's right down from KB Complete, their building, in that open lot,
Yeah.
that next building down.
Is it a parking area? Is that what it?
Yep. And it's increased in size, doubled in size in the last week with the rain we've had, so.
So I will update, I apologize, I will update this sheet, but essentially what it will show you when I take the debt service out is that we are going to be 4 to 5 years. This shows us not being able to cash flow this project until about 2027. So
For the B component would be.
for the B component.
2027.
2027. Now that's going to get a little bit better when I take this debt service out, but that's
1B.
probably going to move it forward by about 2 years.
So 2025.
2025. So
Okay.
you're still a ways out if you look at 1A and 1B. And as you can see, but what that means is whether it's 2025 or 2027, even though you've got positive fund balances in this stormwater fund, up to that point, we can't use them for anything else because we're holding on to them and building them as reserves to do this pay-as-you-go project.
And that's also assuming substantially lower maintenance costs than what we're looking at in real mills this year, right? Because real mills this year are $580,000, and that's projecting out $300,000 for the rest of the time.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
that's
so I think
no
that while we
more
did kind of pull
sinkholes.
that maintenance project, those maintenance numbers might be low. And in this instance, you will see that in the 2026 and 2027 timeframe, I did adjust those numbers. So they're higher then that 6.1 million, these, when you add them up, will be higher than the 6.1 million that I showed you earlier that were the 2019 dollars. So I've adjusted in these out years for inflation at about 3% a year in those cases.
Just curious, the Woodson one is on, sinkholes on city property, and the Fox Ridge is not, is that correct?
No, they're both.
They're
both
They're
on
both
city
in,
So it's
they're
on
both
the
city
new
stormwater
reconstruction,
structures.
What?
on the new, just recently reconstruction part
No.
of Fox Ridge?
No, it's farther back. They're from Broadmoor, like 56.
Yeah.
There's about a 48-inch CMP pipe that runs all the way through our open lot and under Fox Ridge towards
Oh,
Medcalf.
okay, okay,
So it
got
ties into that, so that's where the failure was, but it's not part of that new project.
Okay. Thank goodness.
They'd be fixing it if we was.
Okay, so then let's flip, and I will go, when we move into finance and admin and you're listening to the auditors, I'll go update this spreadsheet, so we've got those real numbers before we leave here this evening. So then when we look at option 2, which is a debt financing scenario for that same project, you will see in 2019, same projects, but you see the addition of $4.1 million in bond proceeds. Now, I tried to hold the net bond proceeds down as low as we can. I think there's the potential to even adjust this down a little bit further based on the numbers, when I finally saw the numbers today. But that brings $4.1 million in bond proceeds in, moves forward with the $694,500 design consultant fee cost and the $4.5 million construction cost. And so you can see that then, and it's a 10-year issue, where initially we thought we were going to structure that and do interest-only payments for the first couple of years because we had a little bit of a kind of rabbit in the python in terms of our existing stormwater debt service. Based on these numbers and the numbers that I've been able to update the last couple of days, I think we can go back to Ellers and probably have them refine that, because if you look at these fund balances, we have the ability to probably go ahead and start making principal and interest payments at least 1 year sooner. So what you can see here is that adding that debt service out through 2030, your first interest-only payment would be due in 2020. Your numbers in terms of your ending fund balances and your stormwater utility funds start to grow pretty significantly. By the time you get to 2031, you're almost at $14.5 million. So I think that means a couple of things. I think that means there are funds available under the debt financing scenario to have the flexibility to deal with more maintenance projects as they arise, or to take on other stormwater projects that we have had on hold for several years. There's also an opportunity beginning in 2020 to look at potentially calling some of the existing stormwater debt, so that would be something that we could consider reducing as well, just depending on what our needs were. So there are opportunities over the life of the rest of this existing stormwater debt to redeem that or call those early. So that would be an option. But I think what you see here is those fund balances in yellow at the bottom are available to us as early as 2020 and 2021, because we're not trying to build those cash reserves to pay for that project. Questions?
Sollie?
So Laura, in that scenario, we'd be cash flowing the equivalent of the 1A project and then doing debt financing on the rest of the amount, roughly?
Yes. So net.
Has Ellers looked at this whole
So the
picture
other
yet?
thing in your packet is, looks like this, and this is actually where the debt service numbers come from, and this is the scenario that Ellers runs for us. So you can see they're estimating, now they're always conservative, so they're assuming a current bank qualified rate for AA bonds, but they're adding 50 basis points to that. So they are conservative in that, but you'll look at, they're estimating a true interest cost of about 2.8% on this issue. total principal and interest over the term would be $5.1 million. So yes, they have reviewed this.
We still have Bruce, right?
Yes, we still have Bruce. So this came from Bruce.
Any other questions?
Yes.
At one point. I know, when Kristin and I were able to meet with you, you shared the CIP's
Oh, yes.
recommendation on this.
Thank
So
you.
I was curious.
So we presented this
Yeah.
project, we presented kind of these two options, although we didn't have as much detail on the cost differential for the phasing, but we presented the potential of doing the project all at one time to the Capital Improvement Committee last month. And they actually unanimously give their recommendation to, and forward a recommendation to the City Council that they would support proceeding with the entire project. And we had some pretty significant stormwater skeptics on that, and that, folks who don't love the debt issuance. But they felt like not only the potential for the increased cost if we do this in phases, but I think we have some concerns about just the overall integrity of the project. If you're building retaining walls in sections and allowing potentially for that creek to erode behind or scour out or continue to do some things. I have talked, based on our experience, with the Broadmoor Street project. I have been talking with GBA about comfort levels with their cost estimates since the preliminary engineering study was done in 2017. They have indicated that they feel very comfortable on those costs associated with the MD management and rolling court portion specifically, because we have been working since 2017 to revise and update and estimate those costs. The unknown for them, and my question to Paul Miller today, the biggest piece would be that cast-in-place retaining wall, because depending on the geotechnical work and what they might discover when they got into that, they had an experience over in Shawnee recently where until they got into the actual construction, there was no way to really assess those challenges, and they had some cost increases. There are still 30% contingencies built into those preliminary engineering cost estimates. And I asked him specifically, is there anything that we can do? Is there any way that we can evaluate that portion of the creek channel now? And he effectively said no. It's just going to be you've got to wait and see once you get into the actual construction. So next steps, we would be looking, as we've talked about with the, if we're interested in moving forward with the debt financing option, we had to wait through really the end of May before we could even consider taking any action, because there is a 60-day protest period associated with the creation of the CID and our ability to issue any general obligation bonds in connection with that. But would like to have some direction moving forward so that we know how to proceed with the design and or construction specifically, so we can really address the questions and concerns of the Rolling Court Homes Association and MD management and that damage that's occurring on the private property.
So do you want us to vote or?
Well, why don't you go through your
I'd be
questions? I think those questions are good questions.
Oh, you mean just a decision making?
Yeah.
I mean, Pat got it.
Yeah.
Addressing your questions anyway. It makes sense to me, the way that the committee recommended it, because one, it needs to be done. It definitely needs to be done, and the sooner the better. Number two, when you look at the difference in the cost in them, just economically, it makes a lot more sense to do it all at once, and that's the minor reason. Some of the other reasons you just pointed out are even more important than that, than economically, if it was a toss-up. And then I don't remember the third part of your question, but.
Well, cash or.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to debt finance at least a major portion of it, like I said, but, the $940,000 difference pays a hell of a lot of interest on your debt, so.
I agree with Pat.
I agree with that.
Did you make a note of that?
He did.
And it would
be a special moment.
Would we go to the potentially raising stormwater or mill levy? At what point will we get into those?
We don't need to, so based on this, you don't need to, there's no need
Okay.
to, if you issue the debt, there's no need to make any adjustments in any of your existing fees or mill levies
Okay.
in order to do that.
All right.
And I think what this says is I think that what this shows, particularly as we get into the out years, is I think it provides us with options. So do you want to leave your stormwater utility fee at its current rate and call some existing debt early? Do you want to bring other projects forward? But you have that flexibility without making any changes. We've estimated all the way through 2031 to the existing stormwater utility fee. And I don't know that you would want to talk about bringing it down based on the stormwater needs that we know we have, but you certainly, I don't think this indicates that you would need to raise that. So I would suggest the next steps, if we're comfortable, that we might consider bringing forward the design contract for option 2 at your June committee meeting. And then we would look at, typically, if we're going to issue debt, we would look at what we call a set sail resolution, and that just telegraphs our intent to proceed with the debt issue, and it proceeds generally by 30 to 60 days in any actual action on debt. And I would go back to Ellers and look at probably trying to shave at least a year off of this debt scenario that we've proposed, and just trying to tighten that up a little bit and pay some principal in the early years as opposed to pushing that out 3 years.
Is there any opportunity to refinance any of the existing stormwater debt along with this?
No, so they have looked at refunding opportunities as well, and we don't have anything that saves us any money in terms of refunding. So we go through a process each year with them.
I hate to jump in, but we refinanced or refunded those debts over the past several years, a couple of different times.
Yes.
So I think we must have a pretty solid deal, because
It is
interest
good, and
rates were as
so, and
low as they could get.
that's what, as I was talking with Ellers this week, I asked that question, what refunding opportunities and where do we have the ability to call? Because we have built in, I believe in every debt issue that we've done since I've been here, the opportunity to call it early in the event that the revenues. So again, starting in 2020, there are opportunities to call a number of the existing stormwater debt issues. So that's certainly something that, based on these fund balances, would suggest could be something that we could discuss in the next couple of years as well. So then, are we comfortable kind of bringing forward design contract?
We just talking about, there's just some existing debt that would look like maybe it's an opportunity there. They've already.
Which one, and I can certainly ask, I mean.
The one that was issued on December 15th, 2010, shows that we still have an amount outstanding of 6.9 million. This is the first of the year. It's over 4%.
Okay.
So this is coming in at 2.8%, and I don't know if it's an option, but we're seeing that.
I will come back with their more specific analysis on what savings would be available there. Okay. Thank you all.
All right, thanks, Laura. Oh,
I just
I
have
guess
one
can
more.
ask
Yes.
a question?
None of these options really affect the role of the town plan in terms of delaying their project.
All right, our last item of discussion is the selection of committee chair, vice chair, Laura Smith.
I really don't have much to say other than we just wanted to telegraph that prior to your June meeting each year, you are to select new committee chairs and vice chairs. And so the committee chairs are appointed for a one-year term, and then we included City Council Policy 104, which outlines practices and procedures of the council committees, but I think you're all familiar with that. So this would be something that would appear under new business on your May 15th City Council agenda.
Any questions?
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Laura.
I doubt it.
Hillary told me that she was only planning on missing tonight's meeting. I think she'll either be calling in or attending the other meeting.
And the last item we have tonight is department updates. Laura Smith.
I don't think I have any.
All right, well, then that
Updated now.
concludes the CBC. Look at that, right on time.
6 minutes later. Right, I'm gonna go update that spreadsheet.
Because we started.
5 minutes. Yeah, 5 minutes. Really?
Her background's in that.
Yeah.
That's an issue.
But I mean, she incorporates the engineering.
How long you doing?
We are lucky. We got your candy, we got truffles, we got orange slices.
A lot of reading.
I used to have in the little place, it's like orange slices.
That looks real serious.
There's probably cinnamon in there.
I have never heard back.
I mean, like, we're gonna have to do our own party, our own design.
I'm worried about it.
Everyone gets some,
Thank you.
oh man, now we get spiral mail things.
Yeah.
It's the same.
No,
This is the audit.
that's the audit, and this is what we're responding to letters.
It feels like it's, I did read the entire thing. Well, it made me feel better about the last thing,
Well, there's
because the debt numbers that were
Every
in
question
here.
you could almost have, is it right in here? The answer is almost in here.
I know, but these don't have page numbers. Like in our packet, it has page
This one
numbers.
does.
No,
The big one.
different piece.
Wait, I don't, oh, this one.
Yeah, that one does.
Because it was this page
I don't mind the narratives because I'm
that laid out our historical, recent historical debt percentages. And I was like, we're at like half of our 10-year high.
There's that whole intergenerational issue whereby the building things in the last 50 years, you want to keep this
Everyone now,
taxpayer,
yeah,
or do you want
spread it out.
people to come in and participate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, I can't do that, right?
Is that usually how it works?
But I got.
Probably great.
I didn't bring my phone. It basically says that. Oops, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. From Connie Miller.
there, man.
From Connie Cook.
Oh,
It
okay.
basically says,
I love them little things.
zero coffee plant dad.
Oh, man, 2 red ones. I got 1 red.
Yeah, there, so that
There's
is.
a lucky guy.
Mark, ready, Kristin?
Sure.
I'm good, thank you. I'll be right taking a very
Well, I think we'll go ahead and call our Finance and Administration Committee meeting to order for Wednesday, May 1st. First action item that we have tonight is acceptance of the April 3rd, 2019 committee meeting minutes.
Any
Changes
changes or recommended changes or?
So moved.
Accepted.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and accept those as published. The second item up tonight is the 2018 audit presentation and approval. Brian Scott, go ahead and start us off.
All right, thank you. Another year, another audit down. So you have 2 items before you tonight. The thicker one is the actual audit book, and then the thinner one is kind of the accompanying letters that the auditor presents, and presenting the audit to you all, the governing body. I'm not going to say a whole lot. The audit went fairly well this year. I do want to thank the staff for helping out, especially Debbie Long, our county manager. She really did the yeoman's share of kind of finalizing the journal entries and putting together the various statements that you see in the book. So I think a lot of due credit due to her. So, but with no further ado, I'm going to hand it
If
over.
I could add, Brian, I mean, it's not just, for the audit. I think to get a clean audit opinion, to get a good set of books, as they would say, that takes day in, day out diligence, doing the right thing every day. It's not just at audit time. The audit is the result it's a review of what has been done throughout the year. And so I think it needs to be emphasized that it's the good work that happens every day. It's the details.
Good point, Mayor.
You've taken my closing statement.
I was gonna say the closer, we didn't get a management letter this year. It seems like every year we get a management letter. It's usually like, oh, come on, really? You know, some about the credit cards or, and Laura asked, well, where's the management letter? There is none. We didn't get one this year.
So that's good.
That's a good thing. It's a very good thing. Just as the mayor said, it really is kind of a testament to the good work of staff throughout the year, kind of staying up top of things and just little things and making sure that those are caught and addressed early on. And that's probably what I got.
Very good, thank you.
Congratulations on 25 years, too.
Yeah, thank you. So Stacy Hammond is the managing auditor of this project. I'll let her kind of go through the books and her letters.
Okay. All right, and I'm Stacy Hammond. I'm a partner at Robert Trahan Company and a partner in the City of Mission Audit Engagement. With me tonight is Emily Sheldon, the manager on the engagement. We're pleased to be here to present the results of the city's annual audit. As Brian mentioned, you have a couple of documents in front of you. The really big one is the audited financial statements, and then there's a report to the mayor and city council. And that report to the mayor and city council puts into writing items that our audit standards require us to present about the results of your audit. So that report forms the basis of my presentation tonight. If you'd like to open it up to page 1, the first thing that we need to talk about is the standards that we used in performing the audit of the city's financial statements. We were required to perform the audit of the city's financial statements in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and also standards set forth in the Kansas Municipal Audit and Accounting Guide. Those standards require us to perform procedures in order to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements of the city are free of material misstatement. Our procedures included examining, on a test basis, evidence supporting the amounts and disclosures in the financial statements. We also assessed the accounting principles that the city used and the significant estimates made by the city, as well as evaluating the overall financial statement presentation. The most important thing that I'm going to tell you tonight is that as a result of performing those procedures, we determined that the financial statements of the city are presented fairly in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. And therefore we issued what we call an unmodified audit opinion. And that is the best kind of opinion that the city can receive. In the next section of the report to the mayor and city council, we would bring to your attention anything we identified in the procedures we performed related to existing accounting policies, newly adopted accounting policies, significant or unusual transactions, or adoption of new accounting standards. There's one item in this area that we need to report. The city did implement a new accounting standard during the year. That standard has a really long name. It's called Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 75, Accounting and Financial Reporting by Employers for Post-Employment Benefits Other than Pensions. That standard changed the financial reporting and added a lot of pages of footnote disclosures related to the city's other post-employment benefit liability. That's related to health insurance, and also you have a liability related to your participation in the CAPERS Death and Disability Plan. And that liability related to the CAPERS Death and Disability Plan was a new addition to your financial statements this year because it was in 2018 that CAPERS decided that that Death and Disability Plan did qualify as OPEB under GASB Statement 75, and therefore the liability needed to be reported for the city. Moving on to page 2 of the report, the city also has several significant accounting estimates that are summarized in the Summary of Significant Accounting Estimates on page 4 of this report. Those are the total other post-employment benefit liability, the net pension liability related to the city's participation in CAPERS, and the fair value of the city's investments. Our responsibility as auditors every year is to analyze the process that the city has in place to measure and record these accounting estimates. We were able to conclude as a result of our work that the city's estimates are reasonable and recorded in a reasonable manner, and that is summarized in the final column on page 4. In the audit adjustment section, there were a number of audit adjustments that we recorded to the trial balance that was given to us at the beginning of our audits, and those are summarized at the very end of this report on the final pages. These are entries to convert from the cash basis of accounting, which the city operates on throughout the year because of the accounting software can only operate using that basis, to the modified accrual and accrual basis of accounting that are reported in the audited financial statements. So those entries are not reflective of any deficiencies on the city's part. They come about because of the limitations of the city's financial accounting software. The final sections on pages 2 and 3 of this report would be where we document any concerns or issues that might have come to our attention as a result of any disagreements that we might have had with management, significant difficulties in performing the audit, anything of that nature. I'm very pleased to report that we had no disagreements with management throughout the entire audit process. Everyone at the city was extremely cooperative, and they were transparent in answering the numerous questions that we had throughout the audit process. Finally, I would like to point out that Brian's already mentioned that we did not have any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal controls. If we had had that, that would be in this report to the city council. The city also this year did not have any what we call internal control deficiencies. In the previous year, there were 2 internal control deficiencies. Those are items less significant in nature that aren't required to be put in writing. We investigated that this year when we came out to perform audit field work and concluded that the city had taken steps to eliminate those deficiencies, so they no longer existed at the December 31/18 audit time. Finally, we have attached a copy of management's representation letter. If you look past page 4 of the report to the City Council, you'll see a letter that goes 7 or 8 pages long and has a bunch of numbered items. We call that management's representation letter. Audit standards require management of the city to put in writing various items that they represented to us throughout the course of the audit. When the City of Mission signs that letter and returns it to us, that's a sign that the audit's ready to be finalized. We like to show you that letter and give you the opportunity to read it because we do think it helps you to fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities in knowing what management of the city did represent to us during the audit. In conclusion, I'd like to thank Brian and his staff for their hard work in preparing for the audit. It's already been mentioned that you can't just get ready for the audit in 2 weeks and have a good result. You have to have good processes and controls in place all throughout the year in order to achieve a good audit result. So we think the city did a great job in preparation, and it really makes it enjoyable for us to come work on this audit. At this point in time, I would open it up to any and all questions that anyone might have about any of our results or any questions at all. Sure.
I have one question. You mentioned the limitations of our accounting software. Should we be using a different kind of accounting software?
Well, there's always a cost-benefit analysis, that should be done. That, financial accounting software is expensive. Your software, I believe, is fairly old. Brian, I don't know if you could tell us what date it was purchased, but I'm going to say it was a really long time ago.
When we, at the retreat, we did talk about it's time to put some resources into figuring out what our next package is going to be because the one we have is ends life.
Yeah, it is a very serious undertaking though. Like I said, accounting software is very expensive, so you always need to perform that analysis to see where you want to go with that.
I was kind of charged by Laura with that when I first came here 4 years ago. And I said, okay, it's working, tell me about how old this computer is underneath my desk, and what about the phone system that goes out every time we have a thunderstorm. So there were other priorities that really need to be taken care of first, and we've seen those, the recabling of the building, the security system, the phone system, all of that. So now we're ready to kind of dive into software needs, and financial software is the top of the list.
Very good.
Would any new software change from a cash to accrual approach?
Your newer software is going to be more sophisticated and it'll account for that change.
Okay.
The problem with it is, you get to the end of the year, you're ready to close out the year,
Right.
and you're starting to pay bills and so forth for the next year, so you're kind of running into this overlap, and that's where I've been doing these journal entries to account for that, especially when it comes to the employee side, payout benefits and so forth, accounting for vacation accruals, those kind of things.
I had, yes, question. There was a question that I had brought up to Laura on page 37 of the audit. And I know that this has happened last year as well. So the question has to do with the stewardship compliance section with regards to deficit fund balances. And I know that there are a couple items there that are identified where you had deficit funding.
There are three funds where the city essentially spent more than revenues and spent more than the remaining fund balance left, which left you in a deficit fund balance position. The Kansas Municipal Audit and Accounting Guide, I mentioned that your audit's performed in accordance with those standards, requires us to footnote to that. There are no real repercussions from the state of Kansas related to that, it's just a required footnote. I would imagine that in most of these cases that happened related to timing issues, that you would have gotten funds then in 2019 to cover that deficit.
And I guess the question that I raised was, or Laura in fact raised was, what can we do to make that correct in the future? Is there a problem in terms of where we are?
I don't know if there's a problem in accounting. It would be very interesting to look at each of these three funds to see if, like I said, if there are timing issues in revenues, were there revenues received shortly after year end that covered that deficit? If there are, then it could be an indication that the funds are being just a little bit overspent.
The Mission Crossing TIF fund had a deficit balance of $142,816. That's the property tax. That's the property tax increment that was collected in 2017 for the 2018 budget. So again, it's accounting for that accrual.
Thank you, that's.
Well, and I think the issue with that, we had some unique challenges in the Special Parks and Recreation Fund with the lease of our cardio equipment. So there was a situation where we ended up having to upfront funds before the lease proceeds were available. And so I think, again, that was a unique sort of timing issue that we hadn't anticipated having to deal with.
I just kind of noticed that there might be perhaps a typo on page 8 on this.
Wow, you really did.
The whole report's in balance.
It said that we have a fund balance of $891,257 million, which I would love to have that in Park and Rec.
Page 8?
Wow.
Oh, it does say that.
Good catch, Kristin.
I'll make a wish.
I know, I was hoping, yeah.
Start writing checks,
That was the Ron Appleton donation.
That's right.
We can certainly fix that on the numbers.
What is the fund balance there?
It's probably, it's not.
I'm sure it's the million.
I think
Just scratch the million.
Yeah, it's not a million.
Please don't reproduce the whole bunch. I got excited when I saw that.
Probably something like 1.2 million last year. When I typed it in, I forgot to take out the word million.
I apologize that we missed that when we reviewed, so we can certainly issue CAFRs with that correction. We may need to give you the CAFR to read every year before we.
Oh my God. I would miss everything.
The new Cripper.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Stacy.
Good
Thank
job,
you.
Archie. Good job,
Good
staff.
job, staff, yes.
Emily, good moral support there.
Thank you very much.
Alright, next up, we have an action item on the waiver of chapter 205 related to fireworks.
Let's just take it to council.
There you go.
Okay.
Fine, so.
What is that? Just go with that.
It's,
We're gonna
Next up, we have item number 4, a cereal malt beverage license application for Nehow Fresh at 1629 Metcalf Avenue.
Martha's giving out beer license.
All right.
Nehow Fresh has applied for a CMB, enhanced CMB license, and they have submitted the necessary application and gone through the background check, and that is for consumption on premises.
What business is there now, Martha?
It's
Yeah.
the same. It was the old burrito place.
It used to be Free Birds and now it's, okay.
Free Birds, all right.
It's right next to the new CBD place.
There's another one?
I
saw that
noticed it when I was looking out the Wellstone. I thought, I wonder if the Wellstone.
We'll be making a trip over,
Yes.
making a call
Getting the
tomorrow.
Business
munchies.
license.
Yeah, I think we take it to.
No, nobody has any questions about their food handling protocol or anything like that? Last time licenses came up about liquor.
I do have one question
Discussed it late,
regarding
so I
the
just
strong
wanted to make
beer signs that are all over town. Are they getting temporary permits for those?
Well, they don't have to have temporary permits. Anybody that has a CMB license already, like Quick Trip, Hy-Vee, they can then sell strong beer, or we call it in our enhanced CMB.
Are
So
you
it's the
seeing
same thing.
Snipe signs?
The
You know, just the signs like in
On the
front of
door?
Quick Trip. We now sell, I mean, they're not AR, you know.
Okay, so they are, okay.
Yeah, they call it strong beer, we call it enhanced CMB in our, so.
But the signs
But
are
they-
okay, right?
Well, I don't know about the signs.
I think that's what she's asking about.
That's what I'm asking. I didn't know, I've seen them on the doors. I haven't seen
Yeah, I
anything
figured that was
right
fine,
away.
but I saw one in Quick Trip. It's okay, I don't, doesn't bother me.
Sure it does.
You know, out on their yard, it
Oh.
saes we sell
Snipe
A
signs.
temporary sign.
Gotcha.
Oh,
Snipe
that's,
sign.
there's no snipe signs.
See there.
Wait,
Alright,
right through our.
Can I go to consent?
so it's supposed to work.
The budget.
I don't know, I thought somebody brought that up.
It'll be short. I've been busy on Rock Creek Finance.
I think it was Pat Quinn that
Consent.
Pat, thank you.
And yeah, next up is our 2020 budget goals and objectives.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. Between the technology issues that I've had this week and
She's so nervous on this budget.
budget season.
Everybody's
So-
favorite time of year.
This evening, I just want to hit kind of a few highlights. So really, my presentation is very short. We are just starting to dive into the department budgets. In fact, I rescheduled a meeting this afternoon. So tomorrow will be our first budget meeting with the department. So a couple of things just overall to kind of set the stage for our conversations going into the 2020 budget. You know, a lot of this is repeat, so we put this out here really more for the public's benefit than yours, because you know what our budget structure is, what our fiscal year is tied to the calendar year. We have a total budget that is made up of about 16 individual funds, and as you know, we typically focus our discussions each year on the general fund, which is our accounts for the core municipal functions, public safety, public works, parks and recreation, and administration, and then those funds that are tied to capital infrastructure investment or that help support the 5-year CIP. And those include the capital improvement fund, stormwater utility fund, street sales tax fund, special highway fund, special parks fund, and the parks and recreation sales tax. And most of those are very dedicated, limited purpose revenue streams that we have been very intentional and deliberate in setting up over the last several years. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our budget development process and propose maybe a change or look at the council's appetite for a change. So I've included here what we originally published as our budget schedule, and I would like to discuss or recommend a potential modification to the schedule. And it's being driven primarily by the fact that this is really our first year of taking the various components of the capital improvement program through our citizen boards and commissions. And we start particularly on the Parks and Recreation side with the PRT and then move their recommendations to the Capital Improvement Committee. And because we're a month behind in that process because we didn't have a quorum with the PRT in February. And so rather than rush that discussion, I'd like to ask the council's consideration in instead of, what we were looking at doing 2 back-to-back meetings in June, so the first Wednesday and the second Wednesday in June. The first one would have been the general fund budget and supplemental request, the second our CIP. That does not give us the time to get back through, that June 12th date is prior to the June CIP meeting. And so we wouldn't really be able to bring, what I'd like to do is be able to bring to you all a comprehensive recommendation from the Capital Improvement Committee after they've seen all of the components of that plan. So my question and/or request would be, could we look at doing first and second July Wednesdays instead of first and second June Wednesdays? The other option is we could look at a work session date at the end of June.
I thought we had some discussion about not meeting on the 3rd because of absences.
And I gotta go pick up the fireworks then too.
Okay. Well, I know we had talked about it, we hadn't taken any formal action, so what we may want to do is look at,
What would our alternate date be if we don't do the?
well, the
3rd?
10th would be our alternate date for that. And so if that's what, if we don't want to meet on the 3rd, then what I would suggest is that we look at potentially a work session on June 26th.
Seems like it would
Does that
be
seem
better.
good? So we'll do the CIP on June 26th and then
At
Uh,
6:30.
at 6:30. We'll still plan to proceed with the general fund budget and supplemental requests at the June 5th meeting, and then everything else will stay on track.
And no meeting on the 3rd.
And no meeting on the 3rd. So we'll have you actually then take a formal vote on that at your council meeting on the 15th of this month, so that we formally move that committee meeting.
So we still have a work session on the 10th though, too, of July.
Yeah, so I'm proposing that we do the 10th, so the 10th is actually going to become our July committee meeting now. So we will do Finance and Admin and Community Development Committee on the 10th of July. Okay, thank you.
You said the 27th or
26th, I believe.
6:30.
PM.
Yeah, thank you, I didn't want to do that again.
Earth hour.
And we're also meeting on the 10th, right?
So we will meet on June 5th, will be our regular first Wednesday committee meetings.
Okay.
And we will have a work session on June 26th. We will have no meeting on July 3rd. And we will meet on July 10th for our regular, we will hold our regular July committee meetings on the 10th instead of the 3rd. So last committee meeting, I think we had talked a little bit about if you had specific priorities, goals, or objectives that you wanted to see included, please send them my way. I did not receive any of those, so certainly open to opening the floor up to talk about those again. In our council retreat this year, we didn't do what I would call traditional goal setting. We really looked at those priorities and issues that had been established in the 2019 budget and affirmed our commitment to those and kind of scheduling of those. We'll continue to refine that goal setting in the future so that as we go into our annual budget processes, we'll kind of have that look forward. But I did want to just touch on many of the projects that we identified to kick off in 2019 are going, as we've talked about, are going to carry over into 2020 as well. So while they may not have, not all of them will have specific budget implications, but I think there will be things that we will consider as we go through that. And I just wanted to touch briefly on those. That will include the update of the comprehensive plan, review and potential implementation of any recommendations coming out of the City Hall Police Department space needs analysis, implementation of the new financial management software, an energy audit and analysis of city facilities, and the development of an asset management system. So as we,
Do you think, Laura, once we start using the liaison positions in the commissions, that we may have more updated things come forward too? Vaughn and I do.
Like ideas coming out of the commissions that would fit into the budget process, or is that part of what your meetings with the various boards will entail?
no, I mean, I think there will, and that's one of those things that I think we're gonna have to figure out how we, what's the appropriate timing. And we're probably, I think you probably still have time to, depending on what those are, to look at the opportunity to introduce some of those this year. Next year, I think that cycle and that process will be more comprehensive.
And if we have other items we want to bring to you, when do you need those by?
Now, yesterday,
Yesterday.
whenever, yesterday.
As soon as possible?
Yes, as soon as possible, please.
Okay.
So again, I think our challenges and opportunities for the budget remain fairly constant. We're going to be looking at trying to keep the large-scale development projects that we have on track, as well as meeting the needs of our small businesses. And just, I have outlined several of the issues that require sort of continual attention and consideration. We're familiar with these, but balancing service delivery and operating needs with our infrastructure investment, considering the use of debt to finance large capital projects, appropriately funding facility and equipment needs, maintaining a competitive compensation structure, managing increases in employee health and welfare and retirement costs, looking at appropriate cost recovery goals for the community center, leveraging redevelopment opportunities, and then developing an annual budget in accordance with the property tax lid provisions that we are now living under. Then I just wanted to kind of touch, and we've talked briefly about this, but just to kind of set the table for our budget discussions, property valuation and mill levy considerations going into the 2019 tax year 2020 budget. Based on the estimates that we received from the county appraiser back in early March, our overall appraised property values in Mission for the 2019 tax year are anticipated to increase by about 5.63%. Still being driven by increases in residential property, which includes apartments. That number for 2019 is estimated at about 7.71%. You may recall last year the estimates were about 16.6%. So down significantly from the 2018 tax year, but still an increase. Commercial property values are anticipated to increase by just a little over 1% in 2019. So we talked a lot last year. Oh yes.
What did you just say drove that?
So the 5.63% overall is being driven primarily by the increases in the residential property, not the commercial property valuation.
So that's something the city has no control over, right? The county does.
The county does that, right?
Well, it's really.
Actually, it's.
But as you'll recall, the pressure last year was, with the increases, was to consider reductions in the mill levy. And I didn't include the table this year, but you'll remember that we talked last year about the fact that from 2008 to 2013, we were actually in a period of decline of property tax revenues. And I know there's a bill that's currently pending, I believe it's House Bill 2345, which would allow for some relief under the property tax lid. So we'll see what happens with that as the legislative session wraps up. The one thing I did want to point out that was interesting as I was going back through the appraiser's numbers. So although the appraised values are going up, based on the categories where those are happening and the assessment percentages, were actually, the estimate for our assessed valuation is estimated to hold basically with no increase. So you'll see in this table below, our tax year 2018, our final assessed valuation was $157 million. And the 2019 estimate from the county appraiser is at 156. So we're not seeing so there's a difference in the appraised values, but because of, again, those categories and because residential and commercial properties are assessed at different rates, we're not seeing that same corresponding percentage necessarily in the underlying assessed valuation.
Is there a portion of Bonner Springs that's in Johnson County?
Yes.
Over there by Case Henry.
Oh, and I forgot to include the table. So I will add the table that summarizes. Since 2002, we've just provided you with kind of a tracking history of the changes that have occurred in the mill levy and the various utility fees. Last year, there was effectively no change in the mill levy. We did have an increase in the solid waste utility fee that was driven by the increase in the citywide contract. And the stormwater utility fee was maintained at the same rate. Again, I think the auditors touched briefly on fund balance considerations. We've long been striving to get to that 25% fund balance goal. We've been there the last couple of years. We continue to be there this year. That fund balance is important because it provides us with those critical cash reserves that allow us to weather short-term economic downturns, but it also allows us to take advantage of opportunities that come along and that may be unknown at the time the budget is adopted. So based on the ending position for fiscal year 18, we again added slightly to, or we exceeded our fund balance goal. So in addition to having that 25% that's restricted, it looks like we're going into the 2019 or 2020 budget with about $1.4 million in unrestricted excess general fund balance. It's a good position. Until we start to look at, and again, the numbers, Brian and I have just really started looking preliminarily at the numbers, but as our initial pass at the revenue projections in the general fund, we're anticipating actually a slight decrease of about 1% in 2020, and that's being primarily driven by continued decreases in membership revenue at the community center and decreases in fine and forfeiture revenue for the police department. So those are probably $250,000 a piece. You'll see when we start to go through the revenues in detail, you'll see a decrease in plan review and inspection fees. That is obviously fluctuates with the size and scope of the development projects that are occurring in the community. So with the Mission Trails project and Gateway in 2019, those numbers were inflated. They will come back in 2020. Sales tax revenues are projected to experience moderate growth at about 2%, which is a benefit not only to the general fund, but to our capital infrastructure funds as well for the street sales tax and the parks and recreation sales tax. We'll also be working, now that we have more of the specific tenants identified at the Gateway site. I've talked with Bruce Kimmel at Ellers about going back and sort of refining or updating the projections for the Gateway project to kind of see what those longer-term impacts might be to our budget, and particularly as it relates to the dedicated sales taxes, which are not included as a part of any of the redevelopment agreement or incentives that were provided in connection with that project.
Laura, do you look at potential sales taxes in regards to internet sales?
So
Or do we not?
We do collect those. I mean, those are the compensating use tax generally, which has been incredibly high. We've seen upwards of, I think, 75% increases over budgeted figures in those collections, but we're pretty, you can't count on that.
Yeah.
Big driver of that is AT&T.
So not so much internet sales, but when they purchase equipment and then bring it in, so.
Remember that tour we took a few years ago, it was huge rooms full of servers and all those upgrades, paying sales tax on that. So, but yeah, the general average person sitting at home buying something from Amazon, it's having a benefit.
So I think, there's not, which is not uncommon. I mean, I think we've seen moderate growth overall in our revenues, so it'll be interesting to kind of look at the position this year where we're actually seeing some declining revenues, and we may need to bring those numbers down even a little bit more. We really want to kind of dive into the community center revenues in particular.
When is the trash service contract?
It will be up
Negotiation?
at the end of this year, and so we will go out towards the end of the summer with an RFP. So that will be an unknown as we go through this budget process. I think we'll try to build in, what we might anticipate in seeing at rates, but we would obviously have those numbers back that we move forward with that RFP process. I will tell you there's always a lot of work that happens in any particular budget, but in looking at just the base budget requests that have come in from the departments so far for 2020, and that's before any of their additional supplemental requests, we're upside down revenues to expenditures to the tune of about $896,000. So there's going to be a lot of work that we do before you see it, and we will certainly share some of those difficult decisions. So we'll make some of those and share with you what we've done, and then there will be others for us to make together. And the supplemental requests are also significant. So our plan would be this year we'll come forward and we will show you all of the supplemental requests that were made. And then we'll show you those that we're recommending or including in the budget.
I would also encourage us to continue looking for grant opportunities where we can, even if they're at lower images. I think we still continue to look for those.
Every little bit helps. So for the last couple of years, and if you would, I included in your packet the budget resolution from this current year. So we used to lead our annual budget process with a draft budget resolution and the budget policies and philosophies that would underpin. And we went through a period of budget cycles with the council where some felt like that was we had the cart before the horse. And so we were making some value and policy decisions or statements before we really had the opportunity to review the budget. So we backed off from that over the last several years, and we've kind of come in with reserving that budget resolution until the very end, until we've had those conversations. And so we won't present a formal resolution, but I did want to spend a few minutes this evening looking at the current year's resolution. And we've talked about some of these things as we looked at the Rock Creek project, for example. But I want to just at least run through those so that they're fresh in our minds in terms of what we look at and what we consider and where we might need to or want to think about changes to that. So the first section, when we look at section 1 of the resolution, we look at the policies that support the 5-year capital improvement program. So last year, for this current budget year, that included a maintenance of the stormwater utility fee at $28 per ERU per month. $1 per ERU generates about $90,000 in stormwater utility fee revenue. Then we have the property tax mill rates in Rock Creek Drainage District 1, which is inclusive of the Gateway site, and then 10.5 mills in Rock Creek Drainage District number 2. I would expect that as the Gateway is developed, the revenues coming off of that Rock Creek Drainage District number 1 will increase significantly. Obviously, those numbers have been incredibly low because there have been no improvements on that site. Looking at maintaining the total mill levy in the general fund at an estimated total mill rate of somewhere between 17.8 and 17.9%. That fluctuates every year. We go into the budget process, but that can change slightly, and you saw that in the other table, just based on whatever our final assessed valuation is.
Will we have an understanding in the budget process of what that could be within the cap? Like if there is
Yes.
any
Yes.
or chance to move that, I guess, rather?
Yes. And then approximately 7 mills of that, or in this current year budget, just over $1 million will be transferred to the capital improvement fund to support street maintenance activities. So that was a continued commitment to investment in street with elimination of the transportation utility fee. And then use of the Parks and Recreation sales tax revenues for debt service on the outdoor aquatic facility and equipment costs associated with the community center and maintenance of our outdoor park and trail amenities. The sales tax language actually authorized those sales tax dollars to be used for operating expenses as well. For the last several years, we have made a very specific decision to use those sales tax dollars for debt service and capital only, and not to support operations of the community center. Then as we kind of move into the policies that support the general fund and the maintenance of basic services, preserving that basically 10.9 mils for general fund operations, Maintaining that general fund balance of no less than 25% of the total general fund revenues. We dealt with increases, we've cost shared, so we've split the cost of the residential solid waste contract. Residents pay about 86% of that, the city pays about 14% of that for trash, recycling, and yard waste collection services. Continuing to manage the organization's pay structure and benefits in accordance with our total compensation philosophy that was developed in 2017. And this year we established about a 3% merit pool. In speaking with the other cities in Northeast and in Johnson County, merit pools look like they're going to range somewhere between 3 to 5% for 2020. Continued replacement of our highest priority capital needs. Maintaining our franchise and mill rebate program, and then continuing to evaluate opportunities to improve the cost recovery for the community center. Is there anything that anybody knows or can think of now that would be a policy or philosophy that you would like us to also make sure we're holding out in front of us as we go through this process?
Well, how are we going to fit in this issue of space needs? Is that going to be something that will come through the CIP then?
I think it's going to have to. That's going to be another project that far exceeds anything that we have in terms of cash reserves. So you may recall, so right now, in fact, we're kicking off, we have a kickoff meeting with the employees on Monday of next week. We've been working on questionnaires that were developed by the consultants to just talk about adjacencies and needs and a variety of different things. I think that we will, by mid-June, have kind of their first report back to us in terms of what is the space that we actually need, and then you may recall that depending on what that says will kind of guide the next step in terms of phase 2 of the study and what options we might look at. But I think we're going to be, we'll be well into this budget process before we have those kinds of numbers that we can look at.
Well, I've got a question.
Yes.
On the residential property values that you mentioned earlier, is that, for mission, is that pretty much tracked with the county or how?
I think we're a little higher. I'll go back and look and see. I just looked at our mission-specific data. I think we're trending a little higher. So the Northeast cities are still continue to trend a little bit higher than the county overall. But I'll update that and make sure we look at that as we go forward.
The other thing to remember on that issue is there was a period of time when property taxes were decreasing. And so you feel the pinch now because it's going up, but if you look over time, we're actually
About where we should
coming back to where we were at one time before the recession.
The sale of houses has just gone unbelievable.
Well, and the target homes are the kind that Mission has. It's the under 200, under 250,000 that are the ones that are, those are the ones that everybody wants right now.
That's what's driving these lot splits, as home builders, this is the perfect market because you have young families who want to move here with good schools and close to downtown, job opportunities
We
there.
have neighborhoods
That's
still.
We do,
Right
and
price range.
as we go through the conversations in the next several months with this pilot project that we're doing with the NLC grant on surrounding affordable housing and the issues, there was a presentation at the First Suburbs Coalition Group earlier, or last month now, it was in April, about affordable housing and where we fit in terms of that conversation. And so when you look at homes, we have some pretty strong percentages when you define affordable housing as $200,000 homes. Once you get below $100,000, we essentially have, Merriam is about the only community in that First Suburbs Coalition that has anything that is classified in that fashion. So it'll be an interesting conversation too to look at this balance of housing, meeting housing needs in our community. That's really all I have this evening.
With regards to the schedule that's sent out to us, are we gonna start to include the liaison schedules with the different commissions as part of that, so that we are reminded what we're
Yes.
supposed to?
When agenda packets go out, we'll make sure that you get those, and, yes. So third Monday of every month for CIP. No, second Monday. Third Monday is PRT. Yep.
Great job, Laura, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have a lot of work to do this year,
Let us know.
so, absolutely.
And Laura, you said we'll get electronic copies of all the.
Yeah, we'll send those out, I've got them scanned.
All right, the only other item is just a discussion item, kind of same as the first meeting. Reminder selection of committee chair and vice chair coming up at the next meeting. So,
Does anybody want to do one of those?
Here's that updated. Recycle the other one. I updated the spreadsheet on Rock Creek, and it moved phase 1B, phase 2, 1 year.
Okay, so it's 2026.
Yeah, design in 2025.
I was gonna make sure that, Laura didn't have any department updates.
I don't think I have it. This is like corrected. So I messed up. So get rid of the one that has debt service in the page co-option. This is my corrected version.
There are no other department updates, so unless anybody has anything else, I would like to move to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Give you guys 3 minutes,
We have
David
anything
made up for the
between
6
now and-
minutes.